Yes, hi again. Good morning. It's me again, Melik Khachiyan, and today we'll still continue to talk about Rook Endgames. And at my previous lectures, my previous sessions, we will talk about. We'll be talking about like field door positions, last kill defense positions, all pretty much famous position when you have to defend the pawn from behind. Now it's different situations. Now we'll talk about situations when defensive side has to defend themselves by having their rook in front of the pawn. So what's the rules works here? Again, a couple of things. Obviously, as I have mentioned before, the rook must always have at least 3 lines between rook and the pawn. So as we see here, we do have 3 ranks. So we have 3 ranks, and we have a chance to defend ourselves against the pawn who comes to queen. Now, a typical mistake what's happening in these cases, I've been seeing this many times. So many players only know one type of defense. What they do here, they do king c2. It's actually happened in a game between 2 Russian masters from 1999. So after king c2, what they know, what one famous plan, just to play rook d1, trade the rooks, and take the game to the possible pawn endgame, which is completely wrong. One thing you have to know here, it's very simple. Well, first of all, right here, the way how you're supposed to make a draw is to make a check, because we have 3 lines, as I said, and it's good enough for me to attack the king, since king has no progress. If you do back, let's say if you play back king e6, I play back on e1. So if you try to improve position by playing king g4, make some possible progress, still attack your pawn, and now you must play, let's say, king f4, then another check from f1, and right here, when you go back and say, when you try to play king g3 to make, let's say, last kind of progress, then rook e1, forcing you to play rook d5, and now we have king c4, attacking the rook and pretty much forcing ourselves to get an easy draw. Because if you rook, let's say, lost control of d file, my king could simply join by playing king d3, and my king and my rook will both attack the pawn, and will be no progress from black side, and it will be simply draw. So that means in original position, white's supposed to play rook f1. Now check this out. So white, again, didn't know that they played here king c2, which is a mistake, and didn't play king c2, but many people do the same thing, same mistakes. White played here rook h1. Now, second mistake came from black. First of all, they didn't play here e4. Again, if you have a 2-file difference, then it's simple win. After playing e4, it's simple win for black, because we have now 2 ranks, 2 ranks, not of 2 files, and that's not going to be enough for white to defend. Because if you see from frontal attack, from in front, it's 2 ranks. From the sides, it's still 2 files now, because if you try to attack from sides, we'll still have a G file and F file only. That means it's not going to be enough for white to defend this position. It's a simple loss. So rook h1 was a terrible move, as well as a reaction from black side. They haven't played here e4 for I don't know what reason. They played king e6. I guess they've been trying to defend themselves, maybe by using the e-pawn as a shield, but it's completely wrong. Now, white figured out their mistake, and they play immediately back on e1, which is the right move. So black holding, rook d8, and now typical mistakes, which pretty much appear the same position as from the beginning. Only difference is the black rook from d7 moved to d8. And now that's the mistake I would like to pay your attention right here, right now. So white player made the move here, king c2, which is typical mistake, again, because by hoping to play rook d1 and try to take the game to the pawn endgame. Now, what you have to understand, in situation when you're having your rook in front of the pawn, by having 3 ranks differential, and let's say your king is cut by one file only, the best position for defensive king is always to stay on the third and the fourth rank. Not the fifth, not the second, it's only the third and the fourth rank. That's the law. The reason, because you're trying to always keep your eye on d5 square at this point to make sure rook will not have playing rook d5 to defend the pawn, and the king will be free to march and support the pawn to be promoted. That's the law. That's the law you must simply memorize forever. I mean, many players, I noticed, many players making the same mistakes. They playing here as happening in a game, king c2, and that's completely wrong move. You can't do that, because the way how you lose this game, it's very simple. King f5, I'm trying to simply improve my king, and as soon as I reach, let's say, g3 square, when you have rook e1 done, then we have simply a rook d5, and that's the move which kills you, because now imagine if your king would be here on the third rank, you would have a move king c4. Since your king at the second rank, you're in trouble, because if you try to advance your king and let's say hoping for this streak, then we have rook d4 check, and now my rook is defended, and I will simply pick up the rook for free. And since you don't have a move king c4, you lost, because whatever you do, let's say if you play I don't know, king c3, king f2, let's say you play rook e4, then I play king f3, same problem, because you have to go back on e1, and after e4, as I mentioned before, now we have just 2 ranks, and it's not going to be enough for white to defend this position. That's again typical mistake what's happening here with many players, because they don't understand how to defend properly this position. They have no clue. Again, keep your king on the third and the fourth rank in situation when your rook has to defend position from in front, and when your king just cut by one file only. Now, to continue this lecture a little bit, I would put the position, let's say from the position, if we try to, let's say, have position by having our king cut by 2 files, let me clear this board, and I'll show you something else. Let's say if we have over here, clear this board. Put the king, for instance, rook on e1, king on b3, pretty much the same position, very similar, I would say, but only difference with now we're having 2 files cut. But again, we're trying to keep the king on the, kind of position, the best for us, king in the fourth rank. But the problem is, let's say if you do king b4 to control c5 square, which is the best try for you, the way how you lose, it's a king f5, we're trying to improve. It's also, again, many players, they don't know the way how we're supposed to win here. The difference is why it's important 2 files, because now we have the move rook e8. Now we put the rook behind, and when you're trying to help your rook, we're unfortunately losing here because of this, king f3. Now, obviously going back on e1 doesn't make any sense since we have e4. We're trying to attack from sides, rook h4, and now we get back to idea by playing rook b8. We are cutting the king, and the problem is, again, we have just 2 files difference between my rook and the enemy's pawn. So that's why we are losing here. That's the reason why it doesn't work, this type of defense in these situations. Now, I will continue this lecture again. Now, I'm going to put another position here. So again, I'm going to try to clear this board. So again, 2 grandmasters. No, we all know who was Robert Fischer. Now, the Sherman, I'm not sure who was Sherman exactly, but I'm sure he was another grandmaster, because the game has been appear in the zone tournament, like I said, back to 1958. So right here, with black's turn, black made here move king e6. Again, typical mistakes, because at this point they should play here Rook A8, because the G pawn is the worst pawn to defend, and they're supposed to play here Rook A8, immediately trying to put the king, the Rook to attack from the front. In fact, if you try to shrink distance and play G5, then we have this trick by playing Rook F8, by taking the game to Rook Endgames and having a draw. So unfortunately for White, they can't play here G5. So if you try to play King H4 to make a progress, then we have a check, and this is draw, because again, there is no progress for White right here. So Black, again, I'm not going to say if they knew or they didn't know. So they played here King E6. I guess they knew maybe positions how to keep the king on the third or fourth rank, but this is a different situation. It's not as we discussed in previous positions. So after King E6, King H4, Rook A8, G5. Now the problem is I don't have Rook F8 move, and now my king simply cut, and now it's lost because after Rook H8 check, now we're simply losing here because my pawn is too advanced, and that's a trick which, guys, you're supposed to know. It's Rook F5. It's a really important move right here in these positions, and that's why Black is losing here, because pawn endgame it's simply losing. We have to play, because we are in Zugzwang, we must play Rook H8, and now after this, it's simply lost because let's pretty much any move. Fischer choose here Rook F2, and that's also lost because after this, let's say Rook G1 check, I'm playing King H6, and there is no way you can defend this position because the king on the wrong side. It's just a bad position. It's lost. So after King G5, Black tried here. After Rook F2, I'm sorry. Black tried here Rook H3, but it's still, you don't help them a lot because after this, we are simply winning by building the breach and winning the game. So again, let's clarify what's typical mistake here. Again, in this case, when you are playing against knight pawn, against the G or B pawn, and your king caught in the middle of the board on E file at this point, right? So the way how he's supposed to play, how he's supposed to defend, quickly play here Rook A8. So making sure you have still 3 ranks between your rook and the pawn, and also threatening to play here Rook F8. That's pretty much your only way to, to defend this position. Otherwise, you simply lost. Obviously, I would say if we will put the white king in the, let's say, in the original position on H4, I would say actually this is it's not defendable, because if you put the king on H4, then I think it's I think it's defendable. Let's say if you king on H4, Rook A8, it's still a threat is to play Rook F8, and it's still pretty much the idea to make a draw. That's the only chance for Black to defend this position. Otherwise, as I said, you will simply lose this game. Also, I would suggest here to find the recent game, kind of to continue this theme. It's actually a very interesting game. I think I saw it in this year from Turkey World Championship, Team World Championship between Indian Grandmaster Khachiyan against Leon Aronian. It was a really interesting endgame again versus G pawn. And Aronian actually also made a few mistakes, and he lost this pretty much theoretical position. So it's important for you guys to understand the principles, how you're supposed to defend these positions, and not making mistakes in future. Well, I hope you understood, and we'll continue to talk about common mistakes in Rook endgames in our future lectures. Thank you, and have a nice day.